Anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View.
You're Kerby Anderson. I hear you on radio. I say, okay, what state are you from? Ohio. Then a little bit later, somebody grabs me and says, oh, we listen to you all the time. We're in Maine. And I would have to say that, first of all, one of the programs they enjoy most, they enjoy all 5 days, but they do love the Friday weekend edition. And then Jeremy Dice is with me today. But Jeremy, you will not believe the question I get most often, and that is, tell me more about Penna Dexter, because of course she was covering the show last week, and people always want to know more about her background. So, Penna, thank you for covering Thursday and Friday last week. And thank you for being here as well. And, of course, Jeremy Dice with us, and he is with First Liberty, and we are going to cover all sorts of issues here. It's been a busy week, hasn't it?
It has been a very busy week, and you know what? I got, just before I left the office to come over here, I got a thank you note from somebody out there, maybe listening right now, from Alaska, saying how much she enjoys hearing Chelsea Human from my office, as well as myself. I'm sure she appreciates hearing Chelsea more than me, but it was nice to hear a thank you note, one, but also from someone all the way up in the top of the country there, up in Alaska. That was pretty fun.
In October, I will be up there because they will be having their celebration and their anniversary, and so I'll be at North Pole, Alaska. Looking forward to that opportunity, and so that's going to be a lot of fun and a good time to be in Alaska in October. If you've been even north of the continental United States, in Canada or Alaska, in January, it is colder than probably most of us have ever experienced, and I've done a few of those over the years.
Yeah, no, you go ahead and take those speaking engagements in January. I'll be glad to go in October next time for you.
And Jeremy would love to get a thank you note, so if you want to say thank you for some of the things he adds, and certainly Penna Dexter, we have depended upon you for all these many years, and we've got a lot to cover today, don't we?
Well, we do, and to me, I mean, this morning I was sort of looking at what we were going to talk about and grieving a little bit that we have so much distraction now. With just, and it's rightly so that we have to investigate certain things, but the idea that we can't concentrate on the business at hand when we have, pretty conservative influences in all branches of government. We could accomplish so much. Of course, Obamacare is on the table right now, and there's going to be a budget and taxes and all sorts of things. So, it's sad, but I think we're going to have to cover, the Russian involvement in the election, since everybody else is talking about it, and ad infinitum.
Yeah, we will talk about that a little bit, but we will get into the issue of health care reform and Charlie Gard and a number of other things. And, Jim Garrity the other day said, I can predict what the news is going to be like, because sooner or later Donald Trump's going to tweet out something. It's going to shock and appall his critics. It's going to delight his fan base. There are going to be all sorts of comments about this. And then Sarah Huckabee Sanders and Sean Spicer are going to have to stand behind the lectern and say, we didn't know what he said, but it stands by itself. And then you're going to have all sorts of people making all sorts of comments, and Adam Schiff and the House Intelligence Committee is going to say this is deeply troubling, extremely important, very significant. Then you're going to have people calling for the impeachment of the president and maybe even calling it treason. And after a while, you're just going to go, can we just move beyond that? And so we
maybe this is just going to be our life for the rest of the the rest of his presidency. I have no clue. I hope
Jeremy's
not.
hoping not. I can tell on
I don't even want to even think about these cases, let alone talk about them anymore. It's unless you have some connection to a Russian something or other somewhere along the lines, you can't even get into the media, it seems like, anymore these days. So I guess we got to talk about it, but boy, can we move on to something more fun soon, like baseball or something more fun like that?
For sure, yeah. Well, we will do that, but let's at least go around the roundtable, since some of this has happened since we've gotten together with the roundtable discussion. I posted one piece, which was, again, by Charles Krauthammer, bungled collusion is still collusion. But the argument you keep hearing, Penna, is that okay, it probably was not the smartest thing in the world for Donald Trump Jr. and others to meet with this Russian lawyer. But it isn't treason, it isn't collusion, it isn't criminal, and yet you would think that it was from all the hysteria you're hearing, at least from some individuals in both parties.
Yeah, Krauthammer seems to say that it was collusion. I don't think it was collusion. In my humble opinion, it could have been collusion if if the attorney had brought more to the table. I think perhaps it could have been. And I think when Donald Trump Jr. released those emails, it did signal a willingness to deal somehow, but he didn't deal. And that's the thing, is they can't look at anything and say that you did this. So, I think Donald Trump should have declined that meeting, Donald Trump Jr., and he probably wishes he had at this point. He's, just made another opportunity for attack. I think this whole, though, when you look at the right and the talk show hosts and different people out there who are defending and coming up with things that the Democrats have done in the past, dealing with foreign powers influencing elections, to say that everybody else does it doesn't make it right. So I don't really go along with that line of defense for the administration. But that being said, I think we ought to let these things be investigated. We have Robert Mueller now, and try to just move on with the business at hand of governing.
Yes.
I mean, it's going to be investigated, so let it happen. But I just wish that our media, and I know that we are going to try to cover substance of issues and Congress and, what the White House is doing as far as different things that we care about. And that's what I'd like to talk about.
By the way, I made it the last article that we've posted on the website to show you how I didn't think it was that important, but I wanted to make it first up so that you at least know that we are aware of it as we move on to some more important issues like health care.
I agree with what Penna had to say there, especially that part about governing. And the crazy thing is here, if the president and especially the Congress would just simply get on about the business of governing, they might actually govern, right? I mean, we're into, half the year past now, well beyond the 100 days mark. And what has the administration actually done in terms of a policy agenda here? Very little. And what has the Republican-controlled Congress done in terms of, what they've been saying for 7 years, that we're going to repeal Obamacare? We're going to, I think maybe we'll just adjust it. We'll just like tweak it a little bit here. I don't know what thesaurus you're looking in, but the word repeal does not mean adjust or tweak or make a change to. It means repeal. Yeah. And if you go back to the Greek word, that means repeal. So, I mean, you've got to go back and make these adjustments here. But to your point here, Penna, about the defense what I will call the 7-year-old defense, well, everybody's doing it. I think you're exactly right, but I think it speaks heavily to our political status as we are right now, that the political world is viewed as one in which you will engage in opposition research, not just simply to find out who that person is and counter their ideas effectively, but to dig up dirt on someone, and there is no boundary in which that will stop. And that happens when there's a moral vacuum there from which to operate. I think Krauthammer's point is really well done here, where he says that on this point, it's one thing to be open to opposition research dug up in Indiana, but not dirt from Russia, a hostile foreign power that has repeatedly invaded its neighbors, that buzzes our planes and ships in international waters, that opposes our every move and objective around the globe. That's pretty convincing evidence right there that we've got a political system that's so far removed from what we probably started out in this country, where we're digging up not just stuff that, hey, what do they think about this issue so I can counter that, but you've got to now not only beat your opponent at their ideas, you've got to beat them into the ground, and then if that's not enough, put them into jail.
What happened to civility? Of course, that's one of the questions we will certainly ask. Well, we wanted to cover that, and that's about all we're going to hear, unless you wanted to ask some questions or make some comments. When we come back, there is a proposed amendment that Senator Ted Cruz from Texas has proposed, and it's called a Consumer Freedom Amendment. It is one that has caused at least some individuals who thought they might vote against the Senate health care bill to at least consider it. So we'll talk about that and how that would affect you and your family right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Is Christianity really as bad as atheists say that it is? For decades, we have heard the charges from the new atheists, so we shouldn't be surprised that many of those charges and criticisms came up at the 17th Annual White Privilege Conference held last month in Philadelphia. Paul Keevil, founder of the Challenging Christian Hegemony Project, blamed Christianity for almost every dysfunction in society, from racism and sexism to global warming and a weak economy. He warns that the United States is run by thousands of predominantly white Christian men who want to colonize our mind with Christianity's core beliefs. Now, it's hard to take some of his criticisms seriously, but they deserve some response, if merely to remind others about the benefits they enjoy because of Christianity. Jerry Newcomb, in a recent column, provides a long list. If you are educated, you should probably thank Christianity. Education for the masses was a gift of Christianity to the world. Education in America was established so that citizens could read the Bible for themselves and not be deluded. Nearly all the colleges in America's early history were founded on Christian principles. If you've ever been in a hospital, you should also thank Christianity. St. Basil of Caesarea, who lived in the 4th century, is credited with creating the first hospital in the history of the world. And let's not forget the advances in science. As Norman Geisler and I explain in our book on Origin Science, most of the pioneers in the field of science had a Christian worldview, and others were theists who believed in God. Most of the social movements in the 19th and 20th century sprung from Christian convictions. The abolition movement, the child labor law movement, suffrage movement, and civil rights movement are all such examples. Christianity shouldn't be blamed for what is bad in the world. We should be grateful for the many blessings it provides each of us. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, Weekend Edition, and we are privileged to have in studio, as always, Penna Dexter, and Jeremy Dice joins us today. Let me talk about this health care bill that is in front of the United States Senate, and in particular, I want to focus on what Senator Ted Cruz has proposed as an amendment, and he and Mike Lee and others have suggested that this Consumer Freedom Amendment might be a way to break up some of the logjam that is there. And they understand that you have to realize that under Obamacare, you had to have 10 essential benefits that were covered. Now, these range from such things as ambulatory patient services to pregnancy and maternity to some covering of mental health and substance use disorder, laboratory services, pediatric services. And of course, Penna, one of the first questions that people have is, okay, if I'm 65 years of age, I have no children at home, why do I have to cover maternity, pediatric care, and the rest? Mm-hmm. And so their argument is that these essential benefits raise the cost dramatically, raise the premiums, and raise the deductibles. And so as a result, lots of our listeners said, I was content with a program or an insurance plan or whatever it might be that was slimmed down, but at least it covered something. Now I'm paying into a plan that I'll never get the benefits from, or in many cases, I simply can't afford it, and I'm penalized every year when I file my income taxes.
And their calculation was if everybody doesn't pay into this plan, this Cadillac sort of type plan, it's just all-encompassing and comprehensive, then the system will not sustain itself. And so what's happened, though, is young people who were supposed to be paying into it but not really taking much from it didn't do it. Many of them opted to just pay the penalty. I know a lot of people that just paid the penalty.
We have listeners call in every day that say that.
So they're uninsured, they're paying a penalty. And so, this does not work. The other thing that happened was people with pre-existing conditions perhaps didn't even get insurance, and they'd wait, or not with pre-existing conditions, people that were kind of healthy didn't get insurance, but then when they got something, they would get it. and they could do that. So all of these things, and there's so many other things, just tried to do too much. And what we needed to do was take, and I think, we can talk about this later, but last week I had Dr. Merrill Matthews on, and he said, way back when we were talking about this, if we had just dealt with that segment of the people that needed this and left everybody else alone and not tried to revamp the whole system, it would have been much simpler. We need to go back to that.
Well, again, Ted Cruz, his idea is the Consumer Freedom Amendment would say that every insurance company would have to have an Obamacare compliant policy.
At least one.
But they wouldn't have to have more than one. They would have to have at least one, but then they could have some others stripped down policies. And this is, I think, for our listeners that are in some of the states which have actually have those cheaper policies, Oklahoma, Georgia, for example, they saw tremendous sticker shock compared to, say somebody in New Jersey or maybe in New York would face, because in some cases those mandates were in those various states. But it would allow you then to have something that looks like a free market system. So this is one of the issues right now. Will the Consumer Freedom Amendment stay in the Senate bill? Right now it's covered with brackets. You always wonder what that means and whether it get pulled out when there's reconciliation. But it's one attempt, maybe an 11th hour attempt by people like Ted Cruz and Mike Lee, to still have something that begins the process of repeal. But Jeremy, let me come to you. It still doesn't look a lot like repeal. It looks like revamp with a little bit of free market added on the side. What's your thoughts?
No, that's right. And we've been told for 7 years now that the GOP, look, you put us in power, we're going to repeal this thing. Well, it doesn't look like you are or want to or whatever. So, look, I don't know what's going on behind in those smoke-filled rooms in the bottom basement of the Senate chambers there or wherever these talks are going on, but I do wish that they would remain faithful to what they've told the American people that they were going to do. And I think if they continue along this trend, they're going to find the American people turning around and saying, no, we've had enough. You guys are exactly the same, but whether you have an R or D beside your name, we'll just start something else entirely and get rid of you as well. And maybe that is actually what is needing to have happen. Now, if there is any kind of a glimmer of silver in these dark clouds, I think it is that, as you pointed out, there's at least an effort by probably Senators Lee and Cruz to try to force down a free market principle on things, at least a little bit here, because the solution has been thus far, this government program isn't working. We know what we should do. We should do more government.
That's not working very well.
That doesn't seem to be the best idea, perhaps. Maybe if the problem is government, maybe we ought to remove the government part of it all.
One of the other things we see, and I want to put this on too, is Medicaid, because Medicaid has been something which at least the Democrats have said that the Republicans have cut, they've slashed, they've ruined Medicaid. And yet I went back and looked at the numbers, and even under this draconian cut supposedly the Republicans have in this bill, Medicaid increases by 2% next year.
That's a government cut.
And that's what I said, only in Washington, D.C., only inside the Beltway, when the actual program increases, can you see it being called a cut. In the real world, the rest of us would say, no, that's a 2% increase. No, it's not a 20% increase, but it's a 2% increase. Well, and it illustrates, again, that sometimes in Washington, a cut really isn't a cut.
I'm feeling a lot better about myself. I don't know about you guys, but under that logic, I lost weight last year. So I'm feeling a lot better today.
You have such great lines today.
You only gained 5 pounds instead of 10.
That's
right?
exactly
right.
No,
just kidding. You look great.
The man with the one-liners, he is good.
His pizza last week only had 3 slices as opposed to 4. This is a good thing. I'm on the upper track here, I think.
Well, so looking at this, it's not a repeal. What the Senate version and the House version are not repeals. A couple of, I think, good things in them. One, you mentioned Medicaid, and this reforms Medicaid in a sense. It takes out the federal part over time, and the states are responsible. And then it also gives this free market freedom option that Ted Cruz has crafted and put out there. And this is good because, as you said, it gives a choice. And I think the big political part of this, the piece of this that affects everybody in the nation, is the premiums. And so premiums would slow down and not see these meteoric rises that we've seen. And politically, I think this is what everybody wants. And so even the senators who don't like the freedom option because they think, well, the people that have pre-existing conditions or that are sicker, this and that have to get the Obamacare full policy, they're going to have to pay more and things like that. So you still have the arguments over it, but if they really want something to pass, then they're going to maybe have to swallow this, because there are things that the conservatives are swallowing, and one of them is big. It's the taxes.
Yes, for sure.
3.8% on surcharge on investment income, and they say this is for the rich. It's for people that make over $200,000 and couples that make $250,000. Really, the producers in the culture, and and people that have small businesses and things like that. So that's big, and also a 0.09% payroll tax that would go towards this. So it hits the small businesses and the sort of the middle size businesses, and that's still in there, and it's got to stay in there apparently to pay off, to pay for things like an opioid portion of it, to pay for the pre-existing condition portion of it that are concerning people.
Well, again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. So we're seeing that some of the taxes are still there. We're seeing that there is some cut and some flexibility in Medicaid. And, of course, another issue that we've talked about with Dr. Merrill Matthews is the idea of health savings accounts. If I put money in your hand, then you can then go out and comparison shop. Now, I recognize that if you go to an emergency room, you just go to the nearest emergency room. But a lot of surgeries, elective surgeries and others, are strikingly different. And a while back, I went and did an evaluation just of Collin County, because I've lived there. You've lived there as well, Penna. And I realized that there was about $100,000 difference in between one hospital and another hospital in terms of coronary bypass.
Wow.
Well, that's a lot of money, And so, again, you have to understand that sometimes when I am paying for it, or I have the opportunity to make some choices about which doctor I go to, which hospital I go to, those kinds of market forces that happen when I buy food, when I buy cars, when I buy a house, when I invest, those things are going to actually begin to develop in the medical field as well, don't you think?
Well, one of Ted Cruz's ideas was also to be able to use your health savings account, which they were going to expand, to pay your premiums. And so that, in a sense, would help sell it, too, that you could actually, as you're rolling over money, because health savings account, if you don't use it, you don't lose it.
Yes.
So people could use that to pay their premiums, and that might be another selling point.
And importantly, that comes pre-tax dollars. I mean, people ought to be very thrilled about that. That's a huge savings to your overall taxable income.
Well, let's take a break. We've already got some phone calls coming in. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll spend some time on this. Do you think we should have a full repeal, or could you go along with this particular compromise, or do we just need to keep what we have? I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some of those phone calls in just a minute. Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice with us. And one other aspect of what was proposed by Ted Cruz is the idea that the exchange would be turned more into a safety net. Because, Penna, when we talk about this, there's really two issues. And back to the conversation you had last week with Dr. Merrill Matthews. Insurance is one thing. Dealing with people that are uninsured or have pre-existing conditions is a little bit different. To use the kind of trite analogy, it would be like saying, well, I have a car accident and I call up and say I want to get car insurance. No, you just had the accident. If somebody has a pre-existing condition, for whatever reason, they were born with muscular dystrophy, Tay-Sachs, sickle cell anemia, whatever, or they have developed diabetes, whatever, those are, in some respects, almost not insurance. And so what we have tried in the past to do in various states is to have a safety net, to have money to deal with that issue, which is very different than a person that says, look, I want to pay for insurance for the possibility that I might have a need for a particular treatment or drug in the future. So in some respects, Ted Cruz and his amendments also trying to treat the exchange more like a safety net so that all the hue and cry we're hearing about right now that grandma's going to be shoved off the cliff would not actually take place.
Yes, and we posted a piece by Ann Coulter, who she very, very, she's so witty, and her writing is fun. But she kind of compares it to just poverty.
Yes. And
how we need to have a free market, and then we separate out the welfare cases and give them special help.
Sure.
And President Obama did not do that. He took over the whole system. And so, it's not working. We've got to do something. And her piece, it just starts out about how unpopular Obamacare is. She thinks that Republicans would be better off than passing what's being talked about, better off doing nothing.
Right.
But I will say that in her piece, she does not mention Ted Cruz's freedom option, and but she does describe it in her piece that there needs to be a free market. So I'm wondering, right now we're having to give and take. That's politics.
Yes.
So if there is a big free market component, then a lot of conservatives might be able to come behind this bill because we have to do something. Once we passed Obamacare, things were never going to be the same again. It's the same thing I said on 9/11. Sometimes things happen in the world or in the country, and they change it forever. And I just really believe that it's changed forever. I don't think we can fully repeal it. I'd love to, and start over, but I don't know that it's politically possible.
And no, I think you're probably right that it's once it's put into kind of the ideological space, it's not going to be very simple. How many governmental programs do you know that have been repealed?
Right. Too many people, like a part of it, need it for their existence.
Or at the very least, it becomes a political shibboleth with which to beat someone else over the head with. And so that'll be around for quite some time until somebody gets tired of being beaten upon or using it in such a manner. But I liked the point that Ann made in her piece there. I say Ann because we're so close. But I like the fact that she said President Trump ought to use this as a chance to veto the bill and to remind everybody about the free market process in which he's benefited greatly from and has spoken so well of in the past, including in recent weeks even. And I would heartily endorse that idea. This is what I meant when I said earlier that the Congress and the president ought to be doing something about governing, not just simply. You take, for instance, this is a good example because we're going to talk about this later on. President Trump has been criticized, and I think rightly, for his use of his Twitter account at times. I think he uses it at other times for some good, and one of those cases is when he actually said something about the little kid named Charlie Gard, right? And he went on Twitter and said something needed to be done about that, and something has been at least moved around a bit on that. He can use his Twitter for good, if you will. This is a great opportunity to be able to use it for good, not to say we need to pass some other kind of governmental program, which has been his latest tweets on this topic, I believe, but to say, no, the free market ought to govern this whole thing, or at the very minimum, just stop at the word free. We ought to be free to be able to choose these plans and reconceptualize this whole debate over the concept of freedom itself. Is it going to be more big government? Is it going to be a greater increase of governmental control over our lives? Or are we going to be a society which allows individuals themselves to be able to control their own future destiny? That I think the president could speak very well to. I just wish that he would.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is what she says. Instead of squandering this moment, Trump, the businessman, should seize it to trumpet the free market. This is a golden opportunity to give a speech explaining why, contrary to everything your professors told you, communism doesn't work. And I think this would help him with this whole Russia debacle and just to say, okay, here we are working for principles in our country that are freedom, and Russia, a country that is not free and does not espouse freedom in the countries that it influences, is, kind of trying to confuse things for us. So let's just get our minds and eyes off of that and get it on issues and bringing back a free market.
A little bit later, we're going to be talking about Charlie Gard, and of course that gets us into questions about medical reimbursements and rationing and all those kinds of issues as well. Let's take some phone calls along the way. We'll head out first to Georgia. Warren, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
How you doing?
Good. What would you like to add to the conversation?
Yes, I was just calling. I just wanted to speak quickly about the fact that you guys spend a lot of time on the Donald Trump Jr. situation. And as a veteran, I just felt like it was kind of how fast you guys went through it was kind of like a slap in the face to all the veterans and all the members of the military that have lost their lives in support of America. And for you guys to just go through, because to me, it seemed like you're not willing to criticize Donald Trump Jr. It just seems, somewhat like a huge slap in the face to all the veterans.
Okay, well, I don't see the connection to the veterans, but again, I think some of us around the table have heard enough conversation over the last week or two about Donald Trump Jr. We, of course, cover it almost every day, and I just wanted to mention it, and so I wasn't doing that to ignore it, but I just figure at this point we have some investigations, and if more surfaces, we'll spend time obviously talking about it.
Yeah, he obviously, I would have to agree with you, though, Warren, that I wish he hadn't done that. I wish he'd been just savvier and smarter in that moment when he made that decision and sent the email back saying, I hope there's something we can talk about. And there really wasn't. But, I don't want to say that we don't care about that. That there's things about this administration that just you wish weren't the case, but they are. We sometimes have to look at the broader issues. That's the only thing we can do because we've got what we've got.
Yeah. I'm disturbed, on the other hand, that so many of these various news outlets spend so much time on Russia, and we're about ready to implement possibly a health care bill that will affect every listener. As sad as it is for some of the actions by Donald Trump Jr., that's not going to affect you half as much as what you're going to have to pay for health care next year. So that's why I wanted to at least move beyond it and not focus all of our time and attention on it today.
And to bring it to a good point that Warren is making as well about the men and women of our armed forces, there are many things that are left over from the previous administration that really require some changing. How about the National Defense Authorization Act right now? There is, thanks to Senator Ernst, I think, some good language in there regarding religious liberty training for our men and women of our armed forces. If that remains in that bill, that's going to be a major and very important concept for our service members going forward. But where's the discussion on that? You see, Warren, the problem I have with talking about so much about the Russia situation, look, it is what that is, and it is gross, disgusting, and horrible. And tell me what the solution is to it, and we'll implement it right now. There's no one is discussing a solution. They're just saying that this is a big problem. And it gets tiresome after 6 months of hearing the same thing. The biggest problem I have, though, is that it's occupied so much space in every single room, on every single megabyte and airwave, that we can't talk about anything else. And that is to the detriment of our country, including these issues that we're just simply missing. Yes, we're talking about Obamacare right now, or whatever this new version of it is in the Senate, but on the same table that is in discussion right now sits the National Defense Authorization Act. That funds our military. Are we talking about that at all?
Yeah. We haven't even moved all the budgets. There is a real question as to whether or not we're going to meet the deadline for the budgets. And, of course, I think we had tax reform we were talking about, too.
Yeah, and a lot of the president's appointments haven't been confirmed, and he hasn't made enough appointments at this point.
So we've just got a lot of things to cover. We'll come back and take some more phone calls, but I think that's a very good point, and we'll certainly spend some time next week talking about it. But at the moment, if you'd like to join us, I can see some of our callers want to address this issue of whether or not to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. Act, which has been called Obamacare. Will this new one be called Trump Care, or will it be called something else? We'll see what that name is, but we certainly want to come back and focus on that. Let me also mention that during this time, as we go to a break, you'll hear Penna Dexter's commentary. Today it's on Tech Free Tuesdays. And in the second hour, I do want to get into a little bit about the influence of technology in our kids. And so we're going to get into that. So you might want to be listening to that. Or if you go to our website, pointofview.net, you can actually find her commentary, which is there right now. And if you haven't signed up for it, let me just mention that we actually send her commentary out on Saturdays. Mine Monday through Friday, hers on Saturday. And I might just mention, normally at this time, you hear Jeremy Dice in his First Liberty in 2 minutes. So we've got a lot to cover. We'll do that right after these important messages.
As school ended this year, one Northwest Washington, D.C. educator commenced a summer project to try to pry students away from screen technology. She knows that when school's out, many of them have full access to cell phones, which are off limits during class time when school is in session. She worries that rather than playing sports with friends or doing something like going to a museum, they'll stay buried in screens all summer. The Washington Post reported that Diana Smith, principal at Washington Latin Public Charter School, pledged to pay $100 out of her own pocket to each student who could forgo electronics and video screens every Tuesday between the end of school and the day it resumes in August. At the end of summer, 2 adults will need to send a letter to Ms. Smith verifying that Tuesdays were indeed tech-free. No phones, computers, tablets, video games, or television. If every student succeeds, Ms. Smith will be out $16,000. She says she only expects about 50 kids to qualify for the money. She's been saving up all year. As principal of this 5th to 12th grade charter school, Ms. Smith has observed that teenagers are addicted to their phones, to the point that they are losing sleep because they are texting in the middle of the night. And she thinks kids' overuse of social media has intensified middle and high school drama. She's not thrilled about the idea of bribing kids, but feels she's got to try something. The problem is real. In an extensive study of Americans aged 6 to 85, researchers found that by age 19, the average American is as sedentary as a 60-year-old. The lead author, who is from the National Institute on Aging, says the results suggest, quote, social structures in place may not be supporting physical activity. The mindset of the government researcher is to change social structures, whatever that means. I like Diana Smith's idea. Kids need to learn to love time away from their screens. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Jeremy Dice. Let's go to Texas, KAVX, and Ken. Ken, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, good to talk to you.
Yes, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, I believe that the first thing that they ought to do is do what they promised and repeal Obamacare completely. And leave it up to the states to sell insurance as far as anything other than Medicare, Medicaid. That's my opinion.
Makes some sense. You know, again, if you think about certain things that are better covered at the national level, that's, of course, national defense, immigration. But there are a lot of things that are better at the state and local level, education, and I think healthcare. I mean, really, healthcare is very different in Mississippi than it is in California, and that's different again than what it is in Minnesota. So it just seems to me that allowing a lot more flexibility and allowing a free market to take place so that individuals make choices and there is not a government or even insurance agencies always in between the doctor and the patient makes sense to me. What are
I mean, if there have to be certain regulations over healthcare, much better going closer to the people, going to the state rather than the federal level. But still, there's a sense in which with the repeal of Obamacare, it would give states a chance then to kind of innovate and kind of go according to their population. But a lot of people are arguing, no, we have to do something because we won't be reelected if we just do nothing. But, well, Ann Coulter's point is that Trump would have just been standing there when the plane hit the ground. In other words, we don't really own Obama's policy. You know, it may hurt not to repeal it, but is that going to cause the Republicans problems? Or would it be better just to step away and let it
I think
implode?
they would have benefit from keeping their word for the very least of things here. But, it strikes me, Ken, that we've got Woodrow Wilson to blame for a lot of this. I think, Woodrow Wilson led the way in removing the direct election of senators. That's how we used to have them. So
Right.
we'd have a lot more control, and they would have a lot more reason to be making sure that the states were able to control these types of things. And then on the other side of that, he also instituted the first income tax that we had as a country here. And that's exactly, go back a couple years to Justice Roberts saying that this is a tax. The people elected themselves into a tax. They can do that if they want to do that. Well, let's elect ourselves out of a tax if we have to. But this is a good time to remember what our history is here and how we used to have actually a much more free situation put in place where we had people responsible to their local neighbors more so than they are now, being one step more removed from the direct election of senators.
The problem, I think, Penna, is that right now, if we don't do anything, the costs are going to go up. Now, again, a lot of people don't pay attention. I heard someone the other day argue that the reason these costs have gone up in healthcare over the last couple of months is due to Donald Trump. And I'm going, no, these are left over from the Affordable Care Act. But again, sometimes you have to educate people when you talk about midterm elections. But if indeed you don't do something, either we've got to collapse or else you're going to have the various individuals that implemented saying, well, then we just need to go to a single payer system. So it ends up looking like Canada, or in a few minutes we'll be talking about Charlie Gard and what's over there at the UK.
Yeah, I think the calculation that has to be made is, at what point do you allow the consequences and let the other party be blamed? And at what point do you say, no, we're going to be blamed for not doing anything, and we need to do something now, and we need to, take some steps, and then we need to make it as free market friendly as possible. And so that is, I think, where senators are trying to go and be able to not lose more than 2 votes.
Let's see if we can take another phone call. We'll stay in Georgia for a minute. WLPE and Winston, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Y'all were talking earlier about the penalty that we had to pay if we did not enroll into the Affordable Care Act. And I was just curious, how was that penalty classified? Was it classified as a tax, a penalty, a fine? Because if it's a penalty or a fine, then to me that implies that I broke the law somehow. If I'm paying the government money for something, then that tells me that I did something illegal. I don't know if I'm
Well, John
wrong
Roberts
about
and the
that,
Supreme
or...
Court said it was a tax. But I think classifying
I think it is a penalty under the law. If you fail to enroll yourself inside one of the government-approved programs, then it is a penalty in which it's not like you're being hauled into court to have your day in it, which strikes me as another problem probably. But it is, I think, classically one of those penalties. You failed to obey the law, so therefore you got to pay this. Under the overall scheme of Obamacare, it was ruled as a tax. But the penalty itself was within one of those categories. So,
you pay the penalty on the income tax. So it's sort of like a penalty if you fail to pay.
I'm having a hard time distinguishing things because I think any tax is a penalty. But that's a whole other discussion for another day.
That's a good point. But Winston, your point is that then it says you've done something wrong if you don't actually get insurance. And that was the big issue that the Supreme Court had to decide, and Justice John Roberts resolved that, he thinks, in his mind, right?
Well, yeah, I think so. He says that this whole idea is a tax. The Obamacare mandate, if you will, is a tax, and the legislature is appropriately allowed to pitch those ideas because they've been voted on by the people to carry on the business of government. And if the people want to change that, the court is an option to make sure it squares with the Constitution. But he's saying that, look, it squares with the Constitution for the legislature, who controls the purse, to be able to make that pass. And if you want to, if speaking to the American people, if you want to make that change, the best avenue for you to make that change is at the legislative level. Now, here's the little trick in all that. We made those changes. We made changes in the legislature, and yet we're still not having them repealing this tax that we voted upon ourselves, supposedly. And that's where I have some difficulty with where things are going right now.
Yes. Just while we're talking about legal reasoning, one of the things that's encouraged me about Neil Gorsuch is on a couple of occasions, he already, as the new Supreme Court Justice, has really said, if you want to change something, the legislature needs to change it. Stop bringing it to us in the Supreme Court. Stop bringing it to the federal courts to change it. We are just supposed to determine whether it's constitutional or not constitutional. Oh, we should let the legislature deal with that. That's a concept we haven't heard in a long time, and I'm glad to hear it.
Well, we had heard it in Justice Scalia, so the man he replaced on the bench. Thankfully, he carries that flag with him on the bench now, thank goodness. But he seems to be doing it in a very capable way. I don't know that anyone will fully fill the shoes of Justice Scalia, but it's good to see that we have a gentleman. You think you know somebody when you read their opinions and you do enough research on them as to what they're going to be like when they get on the bench, but you still kind of hope that they truly do and they truly are that way. And it seems to be that Justice Gorsuch is going in that direction. And if you want a really good example of the kind of the wit and repartee that he has within his own writing skills, I'd really encourage you to read his concurrence in the Trinity Lutheran decision that came out here recently. I talked about it on the briefing here not too long ago, but it's just engaging reading and very different from what you might expect from a judge. It's not at all stodgy. It's very captivating.
And again, I might just mention that normally at this time of the day, if you listen on a computer, you have a chance to hear Jeremy do his First Liberty briefing. This week, we got a heavy dose of Trinity Lutheran, and so I learned a lot more about it. And so, again, thank you for your work on that. Today, of course, we have Penna's commentary, which when we come back, we'll spend some time talking about whether or not our young people are spending entirely too much time in front of a screen. But since we've been talking about medicine and rationing, I thought we would, when we come back, spend just a little bit of time talking about the story of Charlie Gard, an 11-month-old whose parents want to take him from the UK to come to the United States for special treatment. And this, I think, illustrates, again, some of the very contentious issues about parental rights, government responsibility, and also the issue of rationing and medical care. So, again, we'll get into some of that. And, of course, we'll continue taking your phone calls. I suspect many of you still have comments about the health care reform bill in the Senate and whether or not that will pass and the impact that will have on you and your family. So visit the website. We've posted quite a number of articles on all the issues we're talking about today. And as you go there, I hope you'll also click on that button that says donate and help us out. During these summer months, we certainly need your financial support. We'll be back with more right after this.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to. Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, second hour today. Penna, Dexter with me, as well as Jeremy Dice, and he is with First Liberty. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the resources on our website that link to their website in just a few minutes. If you're just joining us, first hour, we spent some time talking about healthcare reform and this idea of a consumer freedom amendment that has been proposed to try to implement and to maybe a little bit of free market into this, but still a lot of people are saying maybe we'd be better just not actually passing any piece of legislation if there really isn't a true repeal and replace. So that's one of the issues on the table. And we'll continue to take phone calls on that. But I wanted to get to another topic that we've also posted an article on. It's something we mentioned a little bit on Wednesday on our Millennial Roundtable, but I thought especially with a lawyer in here, it might get into this again. And it has to do with a young 11-month-old by the name of Charlie Gard. You perhaps have seen some of the debate there in the UK. His parents want to actually remove him from treatment so that they could bring him to the United States to try what's called nucleoside therapy. It's a different kind of treatment. It is experimental. It may or may not work. And the argument that has been made is, no, we can't let you take your child out of the hospital to try something else. There have been others that have said, well, we can bring the doctors to the UK. And, of course, originally the argument was, well, we can't let you use our government funds because those funds could be used for other individuals. Well, the parents, Chris Gard and Connie Yates, have raised enough money, so it gets us out of that issue as to whether or not you might be taking scarce medical resources from one individual to treat this child for some kind of experimental treatment. But, Penna, it really does get back to the whole issue that we've talked about so many times, and that is parental rights versus government. There are times when sometimes government has to step in, Child Protective Services stepping in because there might be the possibility of abuse. Or an example that I used on Wednesday, if you have maybe parents that believe that you should not get a blood transfusion, sometimes we'll get a court order to give a child a transfusion to save the child's life. But this is just the opposite. The parents want to use private money and they want to have their child go and try another treatment, but yet the British health system and the courts in the UK seem to be saying, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, you've taken away the money, really, reason to keep him or to take his life. And these are parents. It's their right. This is their child. They have worked very hard to establish a GoFundMe account that's got like $1.7 million in it. They want to take him. They want to try the treatments. Now we're seeing that there's evidence that this treatment, nucleoside therapy, might be more effective, according to some doctors, than was originally thought. So they've had another trial this week about it. And that's what we posted at pointofview.net, that piece, and also a lot of tweets from Catherine Glenn Foster, who's there. She is an attorney, and she's with now Americans United for Life. And so, I don't know what the outcome of this trial is going to be, but it would be nice, I think, to resolve it and perhaps to get a little bit more time for the baby.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that the original reason why they decided the hospital insisted that he be taken off life support because it was to, quote, prevent more suffering. But in the court, we actually had a doctor saying, well, he doesn't appear to be suffering at all. That's very, very, very enlightening, I think, here. But why wouldn't any parent? I'm thankful for these parents that are fighting diligently for their son, and I cannot imagine, I cannot even begin to imagine how painful this must be for them and how difficult. But I'm thankful for other people. Like, I mean, the Pope has issued him effectively residency in Rome if he can get him there, or I know the president here, President Trump, tweeted something about trying to do something here and has made it a way for the Charlie Guard to get here if they can get him here. And so there are people in this. It's encouraging to know that there are people in this world that are willing to fight for this young man's life, even though it seems to be all the odds are stacked against him. It's a good reminder that as people, we ought to be all about trying to preserve life whenever possible. And thank goodness for medical technology that allows us to try to extend that as much as possible today. We have to give them every benefit of the doubt.
You know, before the money issue was there, some people said, well, we just unfortunately have rationing in the British health system. And this is one of the connections between this story and the previous hour, because sometimes people will say, why can't we in the United States be like all these other European economies, whether it's in Canada or especially let's look at the UK, or this last week I just wrote a commentary on Denmark, that really when you have a situation in which you have, quote, free health care, and I'm putting air quotes here, free health care, which is very expensive sometimes, what happens is that it does provide pretty darn good services for individuals if you have a cut, a scrape, a broken arm, a cold. Because in some respects, you go into the clinic, you get treated, you come back out. But here's the issue. If instead you have some major medical issue, then you find yourself in a waiting line. In this particular case, I think there's only, what do they say, about 11 children perhaps in the world that have this particular ailment. So you're, again, dealing with a very unique kind of disease, which could be very expensive. And this is the kind of thing that a single-payer system or government-run health care doesn't do well covering, because, after all, if you only have scarce medical resources, you're going to allocate that to the easily treatable, the ones that have the best bang for the buck, if you will. And so, of course, now the money issue isn't there, but when it was issue, you can see why they're saying, no, we're not going to let you do this, because this is an experimental treatment, it's expensive, and we just don't have the money in the British health system to provide it.
Yeah, so looking for reasons why they're saying it now, though, that money isn't an issue is a little harder. You know, I think it does tie into the debate over Obamacare and socialized medicine in a couple of big ways. One, I think it shows that what we're giving up when we get socialized medicine, freedom. We're giving up freedom. And, you know, we've seen that in the discussion today about Ted Cruz's amendment trying to inject freedom back into it. And now we see, you know, the freedom is lost. Even with the money issue off the table, these people, this family has still lost freedom under socialized medicine. And they're having to go to court to fight for the right over their child. And then I think the other thing that it points up that's bad about socialized medicine is it's just not as good. I mean, this treatment, this nucleotide treatment is not available in the UK. And I don't know that it's available in any other country where they have this kind of a healthcare system. It's available in the United States, where we don't have it yet.
And this is nothing about incentivizing these types of discoveries in the future.
Right.
If we're just going to say, well, look, we've got limited resources, don't waste them on trying to invent or discover new scientific breakthroughs. We're not going to focus our energies there. It's going to just bottom out at some point here. But I want you, as mom and dads that are listening, to just put yourself in these parents' shoes for a second here. And this is to underscore the freedom point that Penna made. You have your baby laying in a NICU somewhere, and you are being restrained by the government from picking that child up and carrying him where you believe he ought to have the best opportunity. That's the loss of freedom that Penna's talking about here. The government has restrained her. They have said you may not take your baby to another country and have the freedom of movement of his body and yours to go somewhere else where you deem better to be able to seek better help.
Well, again, if you want a good argument for some of the dangers of when government gets involved and the loss of freedom, there is a very good illustration. So thank you, Jeremy. Let's take a break, though. Love to get your thoughts if you would like to join us on this issue. A couple other topics to address, and we have those opportunities for you if you'd like to join us. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Is Christianity really as bad as atheists say that it is? For decades, we have heard the charges from the new atheists, so we shouldn't be surprised that many of those charges and criticisms came up at the 17th Annual White Privilege Conference held last month in Philadelphia. Paul Keevil, founder of the Challenging Christian Hegemony Project, blamed Christianity for almost every dysfunction in society, from racism and sexism to global warming and a weak economy. He warns that the United States is run by thousands of predominantly white Christian men who want to colonize our mind with Christianity's core beliefs. Now, it's hard to take some of his criticisms seriously, but they deserve some response, if merely to remind others about the benefits they enjoy because of Christianity. Jerry Newcomb, in a recent column, provides a long list. If you are educated, you should probably thank Christianity. Education for the masses was a gift of Christianity to the world. Education in America was established so that citizens could read the Bible for themselves and not be deluded. Nearly all the colleges in America's early history were founded on Christian principles. If you've ever been in a hospital, you should also thank Christianity. St. Basil of Caesarea, who lived in the 4th century, is credited with creating the first hospital in the history of the world. And let's not forget the advances in science. As Norman Geisler and I explain in our book on Origin Science, most of the pioneers in the field of science had a Christian worldview, and others were theists who believed in God. Most of the social movements in the 19th and 20th century sprung from Christian convictions. The abolition movement, the child labor law movement, suffrage movement, and civil rights movement are all such examples. Christianity shouldn't be blamed for what is bad in the world. We should be grateful for the many blessings it provides each of us. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Weekend edition, we posted a number of different articles on the health care reform bill, on Charlie Gard. We talked a little bit about, of course, Donald Trump Jr., but I wanted to get to one else that is published here, and it's the commentary by Penna Dexter. Many of you might have already had a chance to hear it just about a half an hour ago, but it's called Tech-Free Tuesdays. And this is another area where we, Penna, like to talk about getting parents to think about this new technology and the impact that it's having on our kids. And this why it's very interesting, because you have an educator in northwestern Washington, D.C. that started something different. Talk about that.
Yeah, she's actually a principal of a charter school up there. And so she's been observing kids. That the school is from 5th to 12th grade. And this principal, she was so disturbed by the sort of the bad effect of technology, especially texting and cell phones, and kids being sort of addicted to their cell phones. She says that they're losing sleep because they're doing this in the middle of the night. Which, where are the parents on that?
Yes.
And she says she feels like social media is actually making things just kind of affecting the drama factor at school. And so what she did, and she knows that during the summertime, at least during school, the kids can't have their cell phone. They can't be looking at it. Right. There are rules against it. During the summer, they're probably going to be 24/7 with their technology. And so she decided to implement something, and she thought about it all year. And at the end of the year, she pledged to pay $100 out of her own pocket to each kid who could keep tech-free. And this is all screens. iPads, video games, TV, cell phone, for every Tuesday. She had to get a parent or, responsible adult to sign something to say that they did. So in this school, if every student in the school succeeded,
I saw that number.
She would be out $16,000 of her own money. She figures about 50 kids will qualify, and that again, that's still a lot of money for principal's salary. She was saving up for it, but I really think she's right. And one of the things that made me think that was another piece that I came upon that said there's a big study that it involved like 12,500 Americans. And mapped out how physical activity changes over a lifetime. And this study showed that 19-year-olds, let me quote this correctly, Americans aged 6 to 85 were in the study. By age 19, the average American is as sedentary as a 60-year-old.
Wow.
By the time you're 60, I mean, a lot of people in their 60s are pretty active, but, they just aren't naturally as active or as able to do as much. But partly because of, I think, technology and video games and just not going outside in the summer, not having as much recess. Schools are now seeing that they need to bring recess back because it's affecting kids' learning and their behavior. But there's been an experiment with that over the past 10 years. So I think this teacher had a great idea, in a sense, to try this. I'm very interested to see at the end of the summer what happens with her experiment.
Jeremy, you have 4 boys, and I bet you want to get them outside and not always be in front of screens, right?
Well, certainly my wife does. We homeschool, and so she's eager to get them out of the house once in a while. And, I tell you, it's another little trick when you're homeschooling to try to figure out how to do that, because you do spend so much time inside. How do you get them involved in when you don't have a playground right in your backyard? You got to make a time to go do things. You don't have a gym class to go to immediately. You got to figure out a way to make that happen. And there's ways to be able to do that and do it well. But yes, absolutely. One of our favorite avocations as a family is just to simply go hiking. We love a good hike and a beautiful view and enjoying God's creation wherever we possibly can, as much as we can. But it is a difficult thing to figure out, even as much as we have limited our own screen time. The easy default is to say, well, just go watch a movie. And so this is much less a child issue. It is certainly that. But I think there's a natural human inclination to stare at the big shiny thing. We have a parenting responsibility to make sure that we are parenting our children, to make sure that they are not perpetual adolescents, but that they are, in fact, on the road to adulthood and growing in that way. And one of the ways we do that is to force them outside, to kick them off of the Wall-E easy chair and get them off that little track and say, go make a mistake, go get dirty, go get lost in the woods a little bit and figure out your way back here. Under some reasonable situations, obviously you need to have a little bit of safety control on these things, but it's very important for us to be doing these things and allowing our kids to scrape the knee and screw up and swallow a piece of dirt that you didn't think that they should and all that kind of stuff. That's good for our kids to be doing these things. So,
when I was a kid, I just loved to read. And when I was about 10 years old, my parents started to worry that I never would go outside and play. I would always read. So they started to push me outside. And, they pushed a little too far. But we had a neighborhood where you could, as a parent, just let the kids go out and play with the neighbors. And you didn't really have to check in with your parents all day and tell them where you were. And that was life. And life is very different now. Parents don't feel as confident in just letting the kids go unless you have, you live in maybe the country. So it is harder, I think, for parents. It has to be more planned. And, but I do think this principle has a good message for parents. Number one, have some rules in your home. I mean, this idea of texting all night is ridiculous. And so perhaps everybody needs to put their phone somewhere when they go to bed in the house, plug it in downstairs and then go to bed upstairs. I don't keep my phone in the same room where I'm sleeping at night for that very reason. I just kind of want that influence away from me. I want to have some, a good night's sleep. I don't want to hear a text that comes in or the buzzing or the vibrating of the phone. So some of those rules, and then, maybe some hours, maybe it's a reward to get to go play a video game. It's not your norm all day to be doing that. It's your reward. You get to do that for an hour. Parents can be creative. I'm not going to tell them how to do it, but I do think, we are the parents and the grandparents, and so we have to help the children with this. They are not going to always do the right thing when it comes to technology, because it can, as we know, it can be addictive. The other thing is perhaps we could be a better example ourselves.
Ooh, that one hurt. That one hurt. Yeah, no, that's a hard one as an attorney. There's a saying in the law that if you really wanted a vacation, you should have been a dentist. Yeah. You know, you don't get that kind of vacation and break away from things because your client can always get a hold of you and you need to. Yeah. So I unfortunately am half married to my iPhone at times, it seems like, but there's a necessary break in that at times to have that separation so the kids are seeing, hey, look, this is me engaging with you, and you need to see how this kind of thing works out as well. And I think it's the point I was going to raise earlier, too. Yeah, it is hard to get the kids outside sometime, and there are necessary concerns about safety for our children gallivanting around the neighborhood. But you know what? That can be solved in part, at least, by you being a supervisor of them. Go outside with them. You know, maybe you just want to go out there and yell at other kids to get off your lawn if you want. I mean, you can do that, but at least go out. You know, when I say our family goes out for a hike, I mean my family goes out for a hike. My wife, my 4 kids, including my 4-year-old. We're all out there, and the 4-year-old is, 40 feet behind you, and the 11-year-old is 20 feet in front of you. But we're all out together doing something, and that's an important thing. Show your kids the wonder of these things. Go out and camp. Smell like a campfire once in a while. You got a kid that likes to read. I got one too. Put him outside to read. You know, at the very least, to smell the fresh air out there while you're reading good things on a book that's not on a screen, hopefully, as well. Mm-hmm. These are good things for us to be doing. I hope we would encourage them to be like a Teddy Roosevelt in our modern day. Read a book before breakfast and go outside and get a posse together in the afternoon.
Let's see if we can get some comments from you. What do you do in your family? And what about this idea of screens in teens, which, by the way, is a very good book by Kathy Cook. She's been on the program with us, and we'll have her on again. And Penna mentioned the need, and, of course, Jeremy did as well, about parents. Last time we had George Barna in, he was pointing out that the surveys they've done, almost every parent says they're concerned about the fact that their kids are seeing objectionable material, either on their smartphones or television or video games. But then he goes back and says, but how did those kids get those? You know, the kids don't have a car, so it was the parent that drove them to the video store. It was the parent that bought them an iPhone. It was the parent that allowed them to watch that on television. So sometimes we need to have parents become parents. So again, if you'd like to join us, we'd love to hear your comments. And what about this issue of addiction? That was the other thing that George Barna talked about, and that is the fact that there is pretty good evidence now that if you look at the American Psychiatric Association's criteria for addiction, that a lot of young people fit into that area of addiction. Or if you like an
addiction to their phone?
Addiction to their phone. And the best illustration I can give is one of my colleagues at Probe. He actually teaches a course at the University of Texas at Dallas on technology. One of the assignments is to go through a 48-hour fast. How do they do that? They hand the phone to him, and he puts it in a drawer. There are students that will take a 0 on that because they cannot bring themselves to part with their phone for 48 hours. Those that go through that sometimes after 2 days come in sweating and are going through withdrawal symptoms. So whether you look at the statistics that come from George Barna or just the anecdote I just given you, I think you probably recognize that we have a lot of kids addicted to their phones. Maybe some parents that are as well. So I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter's commentary on Tech Free Tuesdays. What do you think about that idea? We'd love to hear from you right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. An open line. I see a number of you want to talk about media because of Penna Dexter's commentary, Tech Free Tuesdays. If you'd like to read that in its entirety or listen to it, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. Of course, we've also talked about such issues as Charlie Gard and the Health Care Reform Act and many other issues. So all of those on the table today. Let's go to the phones in Texas, KYCC. Phil, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, it's good to talk to you. I've never called into a radio show, but the topic of Tech Free Tuesday really rang a bell with me.
Well, I'd love to know what your family does.
Well, it started out bad. I made a mistake of letting my two older boys have cell phones. I believe they were about 14 and 16 at the time. As a result, both of these kids got involved because of what they're able to do with cell phones and their tech-savvy ability to keep things from us. They both got involved in criminal activity.
Wow.
Both of them were arrested. Both of them have served time. And it was all because of this stuff they were able to do with their phones, texting and social media and that sort of thing, that we also have a younger girl that we decided we're going to do things different. And anyway, the result of that, real simple, is that first off, she didn't get a cell phone. She had an iPod up until she graduated 8th grade. And because she was a straight A student through middle school, we gave her a cell phone when she left 8th grade. But we have always had a tech-free Sunday. We take a Sabbath, if you will, from technology on Sundays. We go to church, and then we spend the day together.
Very good.
And we might spend, in bad weather, we might sit in the house and just read books, but we're all in the same room. We're all together. Sundays, we've just divorced ourselves from technology. And it has just been night and day different between what my daughter has achieved and what her two older brothers got into.
Have they learned from it? What about the boys? How are they? Have they? I mean, is there redemption?
The younger son, oh yeah, the younger boy. He got his life together, married, got 2 kids, doing quite well. The older one, we still are waiting on him to be paroled. I hate to say that, but that is the reality.
Wow.
Well, Phil, I appreciate you sharing that. What an incredible story. I thought we were just going to talk about, of course, electronic-free Sunday, but you have a very sad story that got you to that point. So thank you for calling in. I hope you call in again. That was a great story to hear from you today.
I sure appreciate it.
Well, Jeremy, what about this? I mean, I'm thinking right now you got some boys and you start paying attention to what they're going to be getting themselves into. That's really kind of scary. We grew up at a time when we raised our kids and there were only a few possible dangers, but those have multiplied pretty dramatically now, haven't they?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Scared the snot out of me on that one there. And by the way, a good first call in any radio station. That's a lot better than being caller number 5 and winning the CD. That was pretty good. And then some people are going, CD? What? What's a CD?
What's a CD?
Yep. No, you're right. Look, we've got all kinds of new parenting dangers that are out there. But you know what? These are different in kind, but they're not different in scope, or different in particularity, but not different in the actual parents, whether it's been, forgive the phrase, your generation or my generation or something in between or after. We all have to deal with the heart of the child. And these things surround the heart of the child. And yeah, there's been a rule, I think it's John Roseman, if I remember right, reading him years ago when I started as a parent. He called it the grandmother rule. And it was, ask yourself the question, what would grandma do? Then do that. And that speaks to a couple different importances in life here. Number one, there's this thing called common sense that is somewhere out there that someone else has gone through this and had to experience it, so you don't have to do it on your own. Figure that thing out and do that. There's also a recognition that there is history ahead of you, so transmit that, but also as a reminder that you got to transmit that down the line here as well. Much like Phil has now scared me, there's other people out there that that have gone through things, or I've gone through things, that I can inform them. You can ask Chelsea next time she's on the phone here about Dr. Dice here and talking about her young son's how I was able to talk about. I've had 4 kids, so she came to me for questions on occasion here. That's how it turns out. But there are other opportunities for us to be able to encourage one another on this thing called parenting. But it's not meant to be done in a vacuum. And as my dad is fond of saying, parenting ain't for sissies. It's something that you've got to really get involved with and really say, okay, this is hard. But as we say in my household, anything hard is worth doing.
It is wonderful to hear about sort of the community where we can help each other as believers, as Christians, because I think one positive for technology I've noticed, because I have a daughter with children and I have other daughters-in-law with children, and they use the internet to communicate with other Christians raising children, and some of the ideas and just cautions that come out of those, I get to hear those girls talking about those. And I didn't have that. I read books about child rearing, but some of this more personal way of sharing and having community in this endeavor of child rearing comes from technology. So, it's not the technology that is sinful or bad. It's how you use it. And I think, again, that opportunity for parental involvement and for just training as you give them this technology, help them understand some of the pitfalls.
Very good. I've seen some of these Facebook posts where these young moms will say, I need a stroller. Which one have you used? Or I've seen this. Have you ever run into this? Or even going to WebMD and seeing if this is something I need to go to my pediatrician about, or whether it's just going to be something to blow over the next couple of days. Used to go to Aunt Sally and Grandma, but now we have the internet, and so it can be a positive, but again, as we just pointed out, it certainly can be a negative as well.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to let your kids kind of stumble. This is a good reminder of the beauty that is the complementarity of the marital relationship here. There are things that I'll let my kids do, my sons do, that my wife gets scared to death that I'm letting them do it. But there's the dad side that brings a certain amount of that fear allowed out there, whereas they're standing on the rim of the Badlands there with a 300-foot fall right on the edge of that. It's okay. They're not going to fall. And mom's supposed to be worried. That's a good thing. They're supposed to see mom being worried, and they're supposed to see dad being a little bit more adventurous at times than he should be. That's okay. But just recognize within that the beauty that God has designed between the genders here for mom to be able to provide things that dad simply cannot provide, and for dad to be able to provide things that mom would be frightened to even think about supplying to her children. So this is a good thing, and this is a good design that we ought to embrace and love and push forward.
Some of you want to talk about technology, but one of the callers wants to talk about the conversation we had about Charlie Gard, who again is that 11-month-old in the UK. So let me go to Brenda in California first before we get back to some of the technology calls. And Brenda, what would you like to add to our conversation? Do we have Brenda?
It's killing me.
Yeah.
Who decides? Who is the God that's going to decide whether this kid lives or dies? Do they have the right to murder this child? Because taking him off life support is going to kill him. Okay? What if this is going to be the next Rembrandt? What if this kid's going to be the next Stephen Hawking?
And again, we've had these questions about whether it's a Karen Ann Quinlan or a Nancy Cruzan or a lot of those. And we had some of that conversation just the other day because on the one hand, we've certainly moved away from this idea that all life is sacred and valuable to sort of looking at a quality of life standard. And that really surfaces in a place where you have some kind of rationing. So, again, this is a question that I think we're going to have to be dealing with time and time again here in the 21st century.
Well, the case of Charlie Gard, if you look at it, the way I look at it is we are not obligated to provide all that care that his parents want to provide for him. I don't think that every parent even would be obligated to provide that because it goes way far beyond the normal care. And he's got a feeding tube and he's got a ventilator and all of that. But these parents are willing to do that. And they have raised the money to do it and they aren't involving the state anymore. And so that changes it. I mean, I don't think we are obligated to provide that nucleotide treatment to every child that's born with that disease because, there's just so much there. And I can't tell you how to draw that line.
Yeah.
But in this case, I mean, the parents' willingness And their payment for it, I think, makes all the difference.
Yeah, and the error should be on the side of freedom in life.
Yeah.
There is the freedom for parents to be able to direct the people that they're responsible for, their children. Obviously, there are necessary exemptions for that when it comes to abuse and that sort of thing, but that's not on the table here, not at all. And then there ought to be the freedom to be able to do that, and then the freedom to care for that life, to say, okay, look, it's going to probably cost you something, but as you point out, that's been something they've raised, and there's been a community around them that's come to be able to fund these things for them to try to have that experience there, to see if this might happen. Every avenue ought to be explored, and it seems like the court here has said, yeah, we just don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah. We're going to take a break. We have some more comments about technology. And if you are listening right now, Penna Dexter's commentary, Tech Free Tuesdays, will be airing on our computers. We'll be right back.
As school ended this year, one Northwest Washington, D.C. educator commenced a summer project to try to pry students away from screen technology. She knows that when school's out, many of them have full access to cell phones, which are off limits during class time when school is in session. She worries that rather than playing sports with friends or doing something like going to a museum, they'll stay buried in screens all summer. The Washington Post reported that Diana Smith, principal at Washington Latin Public Charter School, pledged to pay $100 out of her own pocket to each student who could forgo electronics and video screens every Tuesday between the end of school and the day it resumes in August. At the end of summer, 2 adults will need to send a letter to Ms. Smith verifying that Tuesdays were indeed tech-free. No phones, computers, tablets, video games, or television. If every student succeeds, Ms. Smith will be out $16,000. She says she only expects about 50 kids to qualify for the money. She's been saving up all year. As principal of this 5th to 12th grade charter school, Ms. Smith has observed that teenagers are addicted to their phones, to the point that they are losing sleep because they are texting in the middle of the night. And she thinks kids' overuse of social media has intensified middle and high school drama. She's not thrilled about the idea of bribing kids, but feels she's got to try something. The problem is real. In an extensive study of Americans aged 6 to 85, researchers found that by age 19, the average American is as sedentary as a 60-year-old. The lead author, who is from the National Institute on Aging, says the results suggest, quote, social structures in place may not be supporting physical activity. The mindset of the government researcher is to change social structures, whatever that means. I like Diana Smith's idea. Kids need to learn to love time away from their screens. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Jeremy Dice with us. And let's go to North Carolina, WLGP. Andrea, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Thank you, Penna. I think we're naive, Penna, about the damage that's being done through technology. And I know you have to address all the political issues that surround this very political subject, but I think we're very naive about the damage. I mentor kids on the street here. I don't have time to tell you about some of the things I've seen, but I'll tell you this. Sunday night, my neighbors next door were arrested. Dominican Republic, Hispanic woman, beautiful young lady, 22. Her boyfriend, good guy, 42, age difference, yes. They were both arrested. They were arrested for assault. Now, I was there. I was there. The language barrier, what a deal. The device thing was the middle of the whole mess. The middle of the whole mess. I like that first caller, talking about his sons going to prison because they got a hold as teenagers of that thing. And this is what was in the middle of all of that. Now, they're both out now. She's at the domestic violence shelter. She's not got any broken bones, none of that. 2 kids, their kids. It's a mess because I go back, Kerby, the other night I woke up 3 o'clock in the morning and the Lord told me, he said, the truth of the gospel is in relationship. The truth of the gospel is in relationship. Now, we're not building relationships online. I mean, you could start it there, but we're not building it. We're not building it.
Yeah,
I'd like
call
to
them
talk
virtual
about
community, but they're not really much community, are they? And again, technology sometimes can actually accentuate good or it can accentuate evil. And here's a good example of that.
I've seen some wonderful marriages come from online dating establishments. But, today we've gotten 2 calls, Kerby, about criminal activity that's initiated partly or at least helped by online presence. And it's something that I hadn't thought about as much. But obviously we need to think about that.
Well, and again, let's just think about the possible dangers that your kids don't see. I almost always have some mom come up to me after I speak on media and say, do you think I should be on my daughter's Facebook account and be a friend? I said, yes, because they think that this young boy that they're talking to is 16 years of age and they're communicating and giving all sorts of information, but really it's a 35-year-old that's a predator. And so they don't think about this, or they want to post on Facebook or on YouTube or Instagram or something that later on maybe individual that will be interviewing them for a college scholarship or for a job might look at it and say, well, that changes my mind about this. So I think we need to provide parental guidance. And so that's why I would recommend that you get involved, because there are some ways in which technology can make criminal activity easier. And so certainly we need to be protecting our kids from those dangers as well.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, you make the point about, I was always just amazed when Facebook started and it was growing, the things that people and young people would put up there. And I thought, in 5 years, you're going to be looking for a job. If this could come back to haunt you.
And an admissions counselor or a person in human resources finds that later, and it could make a difference, couldn't it, Jeremy?
Yeah, no, look, I think mom and dad are probably listening right now going, oh, my goodness, what are we going to do? We've got, we've got all these predators that are out there, and you've got this, that, and the other thing, and I barely understand the iPhone as it is, or the whatever device I might have. I don't even get that. Hey, look, you can do it. You can do it. You can do it. Don't get scared about the whole thing. You're still a mom, you're still a dad, and you've got a lot more authority and wisdom in your little finger than your kids do. So go forward and be a good parent. You can do it. It's hard, but anything hard is worth doing.
Well, again, we want to equip people for all sorts of issues, and certainly one of the things I would encourage people to do is go to our own website, pointofview.net, and we've got some very good articles. I would highly recommend, if you've got teenagers, to listen to the interview we did with Kathy Cook on screens and teens. Very good book. But, Jeremy, we've also had this week some people saying, I'm not sure what my rights are, and you've got some toolkits that are available. We're about ready to get back into school. Some people have called in. They're part of the military. They don't know what's available. You just mentioned, of course, a piece of legislation that might make a difference in all that regard. But as people go to First Liberty, what are some of the resources that might be available to some of our listeners?
Yeah, go to firstliberty.org. There's a lot of resources there. Just updates on all of our cases, for one thing. You can read about what we're working on today. But you can also download specific toolkits that we have available for you there as well. And that includes things like toolkits for students and teachers that you can download and put in your Trapper Keeper or whatever you're carrying to school these days. Or if you want to order an actual hardbound copy of it, also very small, kind of checkbook size, a document that you can keep in your coat pocket or in your purse so that you know what your rights are. And so when that comes against you, you know who to call. You can do that for the military as well. We've got some for churches as well and nonprofit organizations. We've got a number of resources there that let me tell you kind of the dirty secret of why we have these. We kind of got sick of having so many calls asking for these things. So we just decided to write it all down. and say, here, you go triage yourself first, and if you still got problems, that after you've taken these 2 tablets, call us in the morning. And so that's what has resulted in these things. But it's been very helpful, because the biggest thing that we have found with religious liberty is that people don't know what their rights actually are. And so they have the default is to run away when challenged on your religious liberty. You just simply say, okay, well, you must be right because you're a teacher, you're a government official, whatever it might be. But in reality, if you took a few minutes to thumb through a 10, 15-page document that we've provided for you in very easy-to-read terms, and if you really want to get into the weeds, we've given you footnotes to go look at the opinions as well. But if you had just a quick review of those things, you'd know that, wait a minute, the school told me I can't mention my faith as a part of my graduation speech. Well, First Liberty says that under this circumstance, that's perfectly permissible. Or in the military, that I can reference my religious liberty in my cubicle with everybody else, or my church is able to say this or do that in this context. Go learn what your religious liberty rights actually are, and be prepared then to exercise them and steward them well.
Yes. And again, you can go to First Liberty. We have the link there, but click on the button that says resources, and then you got rights and resources, and then you can filter it according to category. So got everything that you need right there.
Yeah. And, the other great part about it is if you exercise your rights and someone comes after you for doing that, or critiques you, or tries to sue you, or whatever, First Liberty is the one to call then to get help with that. And so, that's why they exist. And I think that the schools are probably one of the worst offenders right now in preemptively not exercising their rights. And then students, parents, they're so afraid and to get knowledge, and, it can overcome your fear. And I think that's just an important tool.
Yeah, don't be afraid with that at all. And look, you've got more rights than you think you do, especially within the school context. And if you're a student listening, you've got the most rights of anybody. So be ready to know what they are and be prepared to exercise them. More than likely, it's going to be okay. Teachers, you've got more rights than you think you have. I mean, go look at Tony Richardson's case sometime on our website at firstliberty.org and learn about her situation where she was told that she couldn't even say, "I'm praying for you," to a colleague at work, at school, in a private conversation just between the two of them. Oh, and she went to church with the guy, too. So, I mean, it wasn't like it was a big, exciting thing. And yet she had to self-censor herself for this whole school year so that she didn't even say things like, "God bless you," when someone sneezed, or wore a cross around her neck, because she was scared of getting fired from her job. That's not right. She's got every right to be able to say, I'm praying for you, to a colleague. She's got every right to wear a cross around her neck, or someone is able to wear their turban or their yarmulke or what have you, their head coverings, just like anybody else does. This is perfectly okay. In a diverse society like we have, this pluralistic world that we live in, we want these different varieties that are out there so that everybody's able to exercise their faith well. And so we can all pursue truth together.
Well, it's been a great program today. I want to thank Andrew, Melissa, Alisa, and all those who've been involved in this program. We're going to have, obviously, a weekend, and we are looking forward to a great week next week. So we'll see you back here on Monday.
In an age of fake news, getting good information is vital. Point of View works to bring you that each and every day. But as Diane in Arkansas illustrates, passing that information along, educating others, is something you can help with. Diane is a college professor. She influences the next generation, and she wrote, "Thank you for your informative letter. I used some of your quotes when I was teaching the Declaration of Independence in my literature class." Diane, like so many, hopefully like you, is taking what she received from Point of View in letters, online, through our app, on the air, and rebuilding truth in this post-truth culture. All of that takes a team. Join the Truth Team at Point of View. Find out how you can help at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. Show your commitment. Make a difference today, right now. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all.